Hey, how's it going? Great to see you again. Now, there's this awesome filter available for a number of different video editing and photo editing products called Dehancer Pro. What this does is, it's a filter. Basically, you drop it on top of your video and it emulates different types of film grade and film process, so you can create nice, clean, stable footage and then get it exactly how you want it if you want a specific aesthetic feel to it. So I've gone out today and I've shot some footage because I want to show you the new version of Dehancer Pro for Final Cut Pro. Here's a bit of footage that I've been out and shot today, which is a friend of mine playing guitar. Now, I don't have any audio on this track for two reasons. One is I didn't record audio, and the other one being that Axel can't actually play guitar, so it would have been unfair to him to do that. But I've got this neat bit of footage that I shot with the Blackmagic 6K Pro, and I'm going to use this to show you how the Dehancer plugin works. Now, it's really simple to set up. You just look for it in your installed effects and bring it over and drop it onto the footage. As simple as that. It loads it up and here you go, and it will show you all the effects. Now, there are some default options already turned on, and as you can see, it's giving us this quite grainy bit of footage here. What it does is it uses a palette and drops it over the footage, and it's actually just static noise or a couple of screens and things, and just enlarges the pixels, whatever. This actually generates the noise to match the particular camera and film stock and settings and stuff that you would have used on a real camera. And it's got a few other tricks in it as well. I'm just going to go through those menu options now and just show you what's there. Okay, so let's start having a look at the top here, and the first thing is it gets you to define the input source. So what I've shot here is I can choose a camera. Oh, this is a new option on it. Camera vendor, Blackmagic design, camera model, 6K. And it asks you for all the information that you're using, so it can apply a general LUT across it and get you a pretty good look all up. I'm actually going to remove that at the moment because I don't want to use it. I've actually already shot this and sort of done a really basic grade on it, so I'm just going to stick with Rec 709 for now, which is what a lot of the footage you're using will do. So if I turn that off, you can see what I'm working with from a starting point. Okay, I'll turn it back on again. So you can choose the camera and get the basic setup so that the plugin knows what type of footage it's working with. Right, the next thing here is you've got some color compensation going on and a few things like that, some defringing that you can use, and various things on here as well. The next bit is film one. Now this is where you get to choose the type of film stock that you're emulating. And in here there's a whole heap of sort of old Kodak film types, and these are all types of old physical film that you might have used to shoot on back in the day. So a whole heap of different things down here that you can choose from and play with, which is going to give you a lot. I know they do add these in occasionally as they profile them, and they also do updates on the film stocks that are available, so if they might be tweaking them over time. And we'll just keep that one there as a base one. The next thing that's on here is the expand, where you can basically increase the contrast. So if you want to darken the black points or lighten them or anything like that. So this is all about contrast control. And obviously you can bring those in and out, and you can see on the histogram over here how much of a difference that's making. So this is just a basic control that you might have emulated in the camera as well. So you can just set the black point and the white point of it as well, just to sort of help you make sure that you're staying with the limits of the histogram. I might just increase that one, or move that one up a bit, so that I've given myself a wider dynamic range, but I don't want to go too high because it wasn't particularly bright in there. Okay, the color mode in here as well is just sort of based on luminescence or normal, so what exactly that does I'm not sure. Okay, the next one here emulates print processing. The first one in here is linear, where it just exposes whites at white and blacks at black and 50% greys at 50% grey. There are other options here as well that expose different parts of the film slightly differently, and this might affect how you want to color grade it later on. So there's a few different processes in here, and once again, it's just something you can experiment with and help you get the effect that you want. Also, you can modify the exposure in here, which is the exposure that you would apply to the negative when you're exposing it, and you know, printing from the negative to the editable footage, editable film stock. And contrast controls, tonal controls, all this sort of thing are in here as well. And saturation is another thing, so it might change depending on what stock you're using to print onto. And if I enable and disable that, you can have a quick look at the effect that it makes as well, both in the histogram and in the image. The next section here is color head. This helps you manage the different color spaces using the different exposure stocks that you're using. So whether you put more light of one particular color or not through here, so you can do a little bit of color correction while you're exposing and printing. If you just drag these things side to side, you can kind of have a look at the effect that you're getting, where you can make it more red or more cyan. You can go green to magenta and yellow to blue here as well. It's just a way of doing a first level color correct. You can also gang them all together. What that means is if you move one, they all move. So you can head more towards RGB or more towards yellow, cyan, magenta, depending on what you want to do and how you want to manipulate that color space. It's quite an interesting way of dealing with color, but it's sort of, you might want to think of it as an initial color grade that you're going to work on later. There are a couple of other tools down here as well that let you preserve exposure as you're adding and reducing the amount of light through different color spaces, and also an overall impact of it. So if you get something you kind of like, then you might decide just to scale the whole thing back down a wee bit and not apply too much of it. If I turn this one here on and off, you can sort of see a little bit of the difference that it does. I'll gang those up, and actually I'll take the gang off, and I'll do a fairly extreme modification so you can see that there. And then if I slide this impact back and forth, you can see that it reduces how much of it actually gets applied to the footage, which is probably something you can't do in a physical process, but is useful to do in this scenario. Now the film grain is a fairly obvious one. It's how much grain is affected. Personally, I don't like so much film grain, so I'm not going to put so much into the sorts of things that I'm doing. So what I can do here is have a look. We've got the size of the actual grain particles. This is actually emulating the physical particles that are actually on the film stock. I'd prefer to take that right down as far as we can. The amount of grain is set by default here at 20. I might take that down to 10 or 5 for me, because I just want the grain to be there to sort of soften some stuff up, but I don't want to go overboard on it. The film resolution, if you bring that up once again, that's going to alter how the what the grain size on the actual film stock is. Shadows and midtones and highlights can have different amounts of grain in them. Quite often you see a lot more grain in the midtones, but we try not to put too much of it in the highlights or the shadows, because it just starts looking really messy. So I might sort of tone down the amount in the midtones there if I want to get rid of it, or bring it up a little bit if I want that there. And the film type, if it's a negative or positive print as well, that can affect the type of grain and how the grain affects the color space underneath everything. A positive print's going to have less film grain noise in it by default, because there's more light data, there's actually more image for it to work with, so there's more light comes onto the film. Negative print has less light going onto the film, so it's going to have a little bit more grain because it needs to be brought up to expose it fully. Little bits and things. Once again, all this emulates the physical film shooting. Halation is an interesting one. This is what happens when you get a halo around high contrast or bright edges. Now you might see this more if you like had a candle or a lamp burning or something like that. I might be able to get some of this to work around the edge of the strum plate on the guitar here. So if I just turn the source limiter up, I'm just going to have a little bit of a play with this. Smooth, less local diffusion. I might amplify this one, and you might be able to see a halo appearing around the really bright white areas that I've got over here. especially if I turn the impact and the hue of it all the way up and down. But basically what you're going to do is halation will give you a sort of a glowing edge around, and the way it comes about is that when you've got a bit of your image that's very bright, so there's more light coming through, some of that light can actually bleed into the dark areas around it. So where you've got the white scratch board here and the black guitar surface, if you've got a lot of halation happening, what you'll see is that there's a bit of a halo or a bit of light bleed that comes into the dark area from the light area. That's basically what halation is. So if I turn that all the way up, and I'm just trying to force some pretty extreme halation. There we go. So you can see here where when the film being printed, the negative being printed onto the positive isn't hard down against the surfaces, you're going to get this light bleeding through. So that's where you can sort of see that happening. I know I've turned this right up a heap to amplify it and overblow it, but you can see it around there. It might be a useful effect around, as I said before, a candle or something, but that's about the only places that you really want that, and it just sort of softens it up, gives it a bit of ethereal glow for a motive effect. Bloom is a similar sort of thing, and this is where the light tends to reflect off something else, say the backing plate under the exposure, and comes back into the film. So once again, if I turn this one on, you might see some bloom happening around the edges of the highlighted things here. I'm not going to go too much into this because I rabbited on enough about this with the halation, but if I enable that, you see that there's a bit of a glow appears around the writing on Axel's hoodie, around the light reflecting in the highlights and the specular on the bits of metal on the guitar neck and head. You might want to use that to create a motive effect. You know, it's really good in romance footage or dream estate kind of things like that, where you might force that sort of thing. The next section is the vignette. Now, vignetting is what happens when you have got an uneven light source that you're using when exposing film. This is quite visible in a lot of really old movies where they didn't have multiple light point sources for exposing a plate evenly when creating film and motion pictures was really new. You know, the early Buster Keaton days, that kind of thing. And what they had was one light that was shining down through a lens and exposing the image onto the print plate. You can emulate that and get some really cool effects, and once again, if you want to isolate a subject, it's really cool. So to show you how the vignette works, what I'll do is I'll just turn the effect on, and I'm going to bring the exposure down, and this is the exposure on the outside of it, and I'll just increase the size of the exposure area in the middle, and I'll decrease the feather. And as I do this, you'll see a hard edge coming into play of where the light is exposing on the image. So there you can see if I want to create a small highly exposed area, and I can just shift that sideways by moving the center on the x-axis, and then maybe I want to really bring it, and that way we've got Axel here within the middle of the vignette. And then what I can do is increase the feathering size again, and you can kind of see how the edge of that exposure circle gets defocused out. And now when we get all the way up on the right hand side here, that's really underexposed, so it's a lot darker. So I can just give a bit more exposure back into that one so it doesn't look so obvious. And now what we've got here is I've created a vignette where the area where his face and the guitar is fully exposed, but when we come further off to the side it's not. If I turn that off and on now, you can see the difference in the footage. And once again, you can use something like this just to drag the user's attention to one part of the image. This is a little less intense, but as you can see, it's still darkening off the area we don't want seen and increasing the light on the areas we do want seen. Okay, the next section is film breath. Now, film breath is an interesting part of the filming process where the footage actually, the exposure on the footage moves in and out, so it's not stable. This might be where you've got a lens that is a bit loose or something, or the f-stop isn't stable. You've got an old loose lens that sort of moves around a bit. So what I'm going to do is increase the impact and I'll reduce the period over there, and I'll turn that on. Now before I turn it on, I'll just play a little bit of this footage for you so you can just see that running along here. Sorry, it's a little bit jumpy because it hasn't fully rendered, but that's alright. What I'll do now is I'll come back and I'll turn the breathing on. I'll just come down here back to film breath, and I'll turn that effect on. I'll just let it render for a couple of seconds. That'll do. And now what you'll see is that the exposure tends to increase and decrease a certain amount. Now I've not done a lot with it in there just yet, so what I'll do is I'll increase the exposure setting here, and the tonal contrast and the color breathing I won't do so much, and I'll reduce the period. It's at about 17 frames at the moment, so you should see that happen quite quickly. And now I'll play some of this back to you, and hopefully you'll see that the exposure sort of gets brighter and darker a wee bit over time during the footage. So it just sort of makes it feel like the light is fluctuating a little bit because of movement in an old lens or something like that. The next setting we've got down here is gate weave. Now gate weave is where the film moves around a wee bit in the gate. Now the gate is what the film flows through, and it pulls a piece of film in. The image comes through the lens and through the gate, through the film where it gets exposed. And when the gate moves a little bit, so it's slightly loose, you're going to get a wee bit of film shake. So what I'm going to do here is try and get quite a bit of film shake in here. So I'm going to increase the translation all the way up to make it a bit ridiculous and put some rotation in it. 100% impact. And now what I'll do is I'll just wait and let that render a little bit. And now when I come and play that back, you'll see hopefully that there's a bit of movement around in the gate. So here we go. You can see it just feels a little bit more juddery. There's a little bit of rotation in there. It feels a little bit more handheld. It already was in this footage, but you can see it sort of jumping occasionally. And once again, this is something that happened quite often in cameras as the gate was getting old. It's a component that they had to replace out and rebuild because it's the moving shutter mechanism that stopped the film from going all the way through, and it sort of pulled a frame in, exposed it, pulled the next frame in, exposed it. So it would pull a frame in, hold it while the film was looping, and it would be doing that at 30 frames a second or more. So as you can see, this is part of the physical process that could age and wear, and you'd get a little bit of twist or movement in it over time because all those little teeth that had to pull the film through. There's a couple of other tools in here for false color, so that you can use those to have a look at various things that you use false color for. And finally, there's a setting here for the total overall impact. So once you've got something you kind of like, if you want to just sort of go, well, I've been playing with this and now I want to tone it back a wee bit, there's my original footage from the camera. You've probably forgotten what it looks like by the time you've gone through all these settings, and you know, here's with all my crap piled on top of it, and you think, well, that's cool, but it's kind of the effect I'm going for, but it's too much. Okay, let's you know, pull that back to like 80 or 90% of what I put in. Let's see what it looks like at 50%. And you can just do this to make sure that you're not over cranking all of this sort of stuff. So you pull it back to say there, and what's that, 50%, 51%. And then you can just like come up to the top and turn the filter off, turn the filter on, and just have a look and see, is that what I was after with all of this? And it's a really good way of just A/B checking it to make sure that you're not overdoing it and doing something that looks just too much, and destroying the effect that you're trying to go for by overcooking it. So there we are. Anyway, that's all the settings in Dehancer. Now the great thing about Dehancer, as I said before, is that it doesn't do this by putting an overlay graphic on it or that sort of thing. It actually uses intelligence in the plugin to generate these effects based on the film stock and the sort of thing that you're you've been using. Now if this is what you're looking for and you want to go and get a copy of it yourself, there's a link in the description below. Use that to go and get it. That would be brilliant. And don't forget to click here so you see any other videos I do. Leave me a link or any questions in the comment section down below, and tell me about anything that you do with this. I really want to hear about it. And here's a couple more videos for you to watch. I'll see you later.